body and grinding down the
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Mayris Breidis, reigning IBF Cruiserweight Ring Magazine champion Mayris Breidis, the last recipient of the Muhammad Ali Trophy in the World Boxing Super Series. He's making news, and he's making news for a tattoo that he got in reference to Jake Paul. Jake Paul, who he has been calling out for months, quite literally months.
Wow.
And I've been saying it here on the channel, that I don't see the enthusiasm, I don't see the energy from Mayris Breidis for a Lawrence Okolie fight that I see for a Jake Paul fight.
I haven't seen Mayris Breidis calling out Lawrence Okolie for months.
I saw him make mention of Lawrence Okolie in a potential fight with him only once, immediately after his fight with Artur Man, and since then, haven't seen much else.
And I don't know why he's calling out Jake Paul so much, because Jake's not gonna fight him.
And let's be serious here, and let's use some common sense. Let's just use what fucking common sense we have. Do you think that Jake Paul even knows who this guy is? And if he does know who this guy is, do you think he's likely to fight him in his very next fight? Mayris Breidis is, in fact, a cruiserweight champion, a guy in the same weight class as a Jake Paul who competes at the highest levels of that division.
The way I see it, Jake won't fight this guy because Mayris Breidis, great fighter that he might beat, don't got no marquee value.
I don't even know if Jake Paul knows who this guy is, and because he doesn't know who this guy is, if he doesn't, he's not very likely to fight him. If he does know who this guy is, he's even less likely to fight him because he knows he's not ready to take on a cruiserweight champion.
Mayris Breidis is just wasting his fucking time.
That he has that time to waste is interesting to me because he could be using that time more conducively to call out Lawrence Okolie, you see, about negotiating a fight with him, his cruiserweight contemporary, his rival.
Is that a real tattoo?
Did this guy really get a tattoo referencing Jake Paul on his body to advocate, campaign for a fight?
Desperate much?
Desperate is an understatement. This is just cringeworthy. What Mayris Breidis is willing to resort to in order to get the attention of Jake Paul.
A social media influencer and pseudo-boxer.
Jake Paul was asked about a potential fight with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., and Jake is actually receptive to that fight. He likes it, but I haven't heard Jake make any mention of Mayris Breidis and this
cringeworthy campaign of his.
I'm just gonna go right ahead and say that I don't think Mayris Breidis fancies that Lawrence Okolie fight, and I know how that sounds because Mayris Breidis is a lot more accomplished, a lot more proven at cruiserweight than Lawrence Okolie is. But you tell me.
He's been at this shit for months.
They weren't in negotiations, and they're currently not in negotiations. Lawrence Okolie has already found his next dance partner, and it's a good choice, by the way. We'll talk more about that fight as that fight date approaches. But I don't see Mayris Breidis.
I've seen Lawrence Okolie calling out Mayris Breidis for months.
But I have not seen the same energy from Mayris Breidis. I haven't seen that energy in reverse. What I have seen is this cringeworthy campaign for a fight that in all likelihood won't happen.
This shit is embarrassing.
I mean, use your common sense. Use your fucking common sense if you got any. Does Jake Paul even know who this guy is? And if he does know who this guy is, how likely is he to fight him?
Jake Paul ain't even got 10 pro fights yet. He's gonna fight a cruiserweight champion?
What's the guy got? 4 or 5 fights against non-boxers? Literally, non-boxers. Guys who don't box.
You'd think he'd fight you next.
I don't know that Mayris Breidis has gone off the deep end or something. He can't have any real expectation of landing this fight. Is he trolling Jake Paul? Then again, how is tattooing his name on your own body trolling him? If anything, he's living rent-free in your head. In some ways, he's trolling you. In super featherweight and light heavyweight news, Tevin Farmer, former IBF super featherweight champion Tevin Farmer, stated via his social media, 135-pound division 2022, I'm ready. Tag some names. I want the smoke.
There are options for Tevin depending on where he goes.
The issue is that Tevin Farmer was one of Matchroom's signees back when DAZN debuted in America. He was a Matchroom USA alum. He was with Matchroom at a time when they were throwing a lot of money at a lot of guys that perhaps wouldn't have normally been making that kind of scratch, that kind of cash. And I imagine that Tevin Farmer wants to keep making that kind of money, but therein lies an issue. This is a very different environment than the one that he was in 2 years ago.
Over 2 years ago.
A little over a week ago, I saw that Miguel Berchelt entered into a commitment with Top Rank. He's going to stay on that side of the street where he's been. I half expected Miguel Berchelt to cross over to the Matchroom side of things and potentially take on Heaven Daney. So I think about Tevin Farmer, I think about Miguel Berchelt, two guys who I expect to see in the lightweight division this year, the year of 2022, and I ask myself, what options are on the table for them? Well, for Miguel Berchelt, he could always fight Vasilo Lomachenko.
What Top Rank could always line him up for one of George Kambosos' titles.
I look at these two fighters and I see a situation to where perhaps Miguel Berchelt, given the side of the street that he's on, he might have more options, whereas Tevin Farmer,
It depends.
I feel like Tevin Farmer. He likely wants to make the kind of money he was making before he went on that 2-year hiatus after having lost his red belt to Joseph Diaz. I think for Tevin, it all depends on where he ends up. He might want to go back to working with Matchroom.
But at lightweight, I don't know that Matchroom has all that much to offer him.
Perhaps they could see about lining him up for one of George Kambosos' titles by way of the alphabets, the WBC, the WBA, the WBO, and the IBF. Though Tevin, I don't think he's going to get paid the same way he was getting paid before. As a champion, Tevin Farmer was very busy. I believe he fought something like 4 or 5 times within 12 months.
But after he lost the IBF title to JoJo, he sat out the last 2 years.
Tevin Farmer hasn't fought since January of 2020. Here in January of 2022, it's been 2 years since he swapped punches.
It's been 2 years since he fought anybody.
At Matchroom, he would have limited options and virtually no super fights outside of a Devin Haney fight. Devin Haney, who's looking to pin down a George Kambosos Jr. fight. Thus, I don't think Tevin at this time would rank all that high on Devin's priority list, his to-do list. At Matchroom, he wouldn't have that many options. But at Top Rank, I think he'd have more options, though he would make less money. You got Vasilo Lomachenko over there, you got Miguel Berchelt, Richard Comey, he's made a few appearances on Top Rank cards.
At Top Rank, he'd have more options, but I don't think they're going to overpay him.
I don't think Top Rank would offer him the kind of money he's looking for, because to Top Rank, what's a Tevin Farmer? What's he worth? He hasn't fought in 2 years, he never had that many fans, he doesn't have a belt.
I think that's how they'd look at the situation.
These are two guys who I expect to see in the lightweight division this year, the year of 2022. Why Tevin Farmer sat out of action for so long is beyond me. I understand that at one point he was waiting to have a rematch with Jojo Diaz for his red belt, and that rematch never happened, and that's all well and good, but what about last year?
He could have made his lightweight debut last year and lined himself up for something big this year.
He's back now. Not all the way back, but he's talking about coming back, and he's talking about coming back as a lightweight. And I reiterate, at Matchroom, he'd have limited options. At Top Rank, he'd have more options, though likely less money. Perhaps he should go the PBC route. And I say the PBC route because he never did have that Gervonta Davis fight, did he? And Gervonta Davis...
Back when Tevin was on the Matchroom side of things.
Gervonta didn't take Eddie Hearn up on his offer, multi-million-dollar offer to unify titles with Tevin Farmer back when both of those boys were world champions. Well, what about now? Gervonta Davis ain't got that many options on the PBC side of things. He don't. What, a rematch with Isaac Cruz? Rescheduling the Rolly Romero fight?
We know they're going to keep everything in-house.
Floyd Mayweather Jr. said as much, so maybe Tevin Farmer can become a part of that house. I mean, if they were willing to put Gervonta Davis on pay-per-view with Isaac Cruz, Tevin Farmer, he's actually got backstory with Tevin Farmer.
And they ain't got a lot of ponies in that lightweight show.
So I don't know, maybe Tevin Farmer goes over there, sees about negotiating a deal to where maybe he can fight an Isaac Cruz in his comeback fight en route to what could be a Gervonta Davis showdown at lightweight, because it's not like Davis has got all that many options anyway. I don't often say this, but for Tevin Farmer, perhaps the PBC might be the way to go. In other news, per tweet from Michael Benson, PBC's Tim Smith stated, nobody's coming to see Tyson Fury as a gate attraction unless he's fighting Deontay Wilder. Maybe in England if he fights Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk over there, but in America, who's coming to see Fury fight anybody other than Wilder? And
well,
as strange as this might sound, that is a legitimate question, because Tyson Fury has boxed in America before against at least two guys not named Deontay Wilder. He fought Otto Wallin here, he fought Tom Schwarz here. And those numbers,
they were abysmal.
I don't want to jump to any conclusions or make any bold proclamations, though I do think that's a legitimate question. What does Tyson Fury do in the American market with an opponent not named Deontay Wilder? I must admit that when he boxed Otto Wallin and he boxed Tom Schwarz, he didn't actually beat Wilder yet. You know, that was in between the first fight and the second fight.
He's been trapped in that bubble for, 2-3 years now?
We don't have the answer to that question at this time. If Tyson Fury were to box in America against someone not named Deontay Wilder, having beaten Deontay Wilder 2 times, does he have the marquee value to draw here?
What's a fight like Fury versus Hellenius do on pay-per-view in America? What kind of gate revenue does that bring in? Better gate revenue than Otto Wallin did? Better gate revenue than Tom Schwarz did? I mean, that's a serious question. That is a legitimate question. Now that Tyson Fury has beaten Deontay Wilder 2 times, is he all of a sudden a draw in America? What would he do with Andy Ruiz? Because Andy Ruiz has fought at least once since having lost the belts to Anthony Joshua. He fought Chris Arreola. And that fight didn't draw a big crowd, didn't do astronomical pay-per-view numbers or gate revenue. So would Tyson Fury and Andy Ruiz coming together yield the same result? Generate the same revenue that the Wilder fights did? Nothing Andy Ruiz has done since losing to Anthony Joshua has people buzzing about him.
That's essentially what I'm getting at. You don't expect to do astronomical numbers fighting the likes of a Chris Arreola, since having lost to Anthony Joshua, that's all Andy Ruiz has done. So if you take that same Andy Ruiz and you put him in the ring with Tyson Fury, does that bring you the same numbers that the Wilder fights brought you?
I don't think so.
Because nobody's buzzing about Andy Ruiz. He hasn't done anything since losing those belts to Anthony Joshua to get anyone buzzing about him here in America, outside of fighting Chris Arreola, getting dropped, and winning a decision.
A lot of intellectual dishonesty when it comes to Tyson Fury.
As bigoted and xenophobic as American fight fans are, do you think that Tyson Fury, a UK import, can draw in America without having a high-profile dance partner? Perhaps an American one. I mean, really, what can Tyson Fury do in the American market off his own name?
All the biggest and best fights for Fury are in the UK anyway.
Dillian White, the winner of Joshua versus Usyk, too. I mean, Joshua versus Usyk in America, I don't think does what it could do in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, I think Joshua versus Fury is a bigger, much bigger fight than it would be in the United States. I mean, those are 2 UK guys, 2 UK imports. If Anthony Joshua comes through that rematch with Alexander Usyk and he gets those belts back, the ideal venue for a fight like that would have to be in the UK more than it is in the US, because that fight don't mean to the Americans what it means to the Brits.
What are you trying to kid?
Do you think the American populace, the American fight fans, are as interested and as invested in that fight involving those 2 fighters, those 2 guys, as the Brits are?
I don't often agree with things that Tim Smith says.
But at minimum, I have to admit that there's a legitimate question there. What can Tyson Fury draw in America without Deontay Wilder? Now that that chapter of his career is closed, is he really a draw here?
You know what that was? That was 2 guys that ain't big draws separately.
Separately, neither Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury have proven to be big draws alone. But when you put them together, you get a decent-sized event, you get a decent-sized fight. But that's over now.
So what can Tyson Fury draw off his name alone?
That is a legitimate question. And finally, Eddie Reynoso himself posted this to his Twitter account. It reads, "Good afternoon. Regarding the next fight of Canelo Alvarez, there is no negotiation with any promoter or rival or date. Next week we will have something concrete. Greetings." And some might interpret this as Eddie dispelling any rumors that they're currently in negotiations to face Jermall Charlo or Lunga Makabu or anybody really, when in truth, this accents what I told you guys in my previous video. There's a lot of confusion between 160 and 168 pounds. Maybe Canelo Alvarez ends up fighting Jermall Charlo. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he ends up fighting David Benavidez. Or maybe he follows through on his word to face the winner of Makabu versus Machunu. I don't know.
What I do know is Canelo Alvarez has earned the right to choose.
More so than any of his contemporaries. Thus, I'm comfortable with whatever decision he makes, because he, unlike many of his contemporaries, managed to become an undisputed champion in about 12 months.
Which one of his contemporaries can say that?
Which one? Jermall Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, which one?
David Benavidez doesn't even have a title anymore.
Canelo's critics, per usual, are unhappy with whatever news breaks. I've seen them diminish Canelo Alvarez's undisputed run at 168 pounds as if either Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade or David Benavidez, who was in that weight class before Canelo even got there.
Same side of the street as Caleb Plant. Didn't unify with him.
I have seen all the bigoted and xenophobic statements,
Seen 'em.
sentiments from some Americans who feel that the fighters that Canelo Alvarez fought en route to becoming an undisputed champion weren't that good because they were European.
You know, the guys that are high on Jermall Charlo.
Jermall Charlo, whose best win is an Eastern European that was coming off a loss.
And a year of inactivity.
You know what I'm talking about, Sergey Didivianchenko. Sergey Didivianchenko, who was given his first professional loss by Daniel Jacobs. Daniel Jacobs, who after that fight lost his IBF title to Canelo Alvarez. I've seen everything there is to say, and all I can do is tell you what I think.
That's it.
And if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do,
Canelo Alvarez has earned the right to choose whether you like it or not.
just like every cash cow of boxing before him, every A-side fighter, every marquee fighter with a lot of marquee value.
Canelo Alvarez has earned the right to choose whether you like it or not.
And if you don't like it, well, then you're in the minority, my friend. Because the majority of boxing fans, paying ones, they're on Canelo Alvarez's side. That's where the marquee value comes from.
His paying public, his paying customers.
He has more of them than the fighters you're so impressed with. The fighters that you're a fan of, whether that fighter might be Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade or David Benavidez, for some reason, a two-time fuck-up that lost its title 2 times outside of the ring.
Fucking up.
What do you want me to feel sorry for these guys? You want me to feel sorry for Jermall Charlo? He had the opportunity to unify titles in the middleweight division the whole time he's been there.
Was offered multi-million dollars to fight Demetrius Andrade.
According to Oscar De La Hoya, according to Roberto Diaz, he was offered the Canelo Alvarez fight, and somebody on his side turned it down. I don't give a shit if you don't believe them. I believe them.
Yeah, I believe somebody on his side turned that fight down.
The same way somebody on his side turned the Demetrius Andrade fight down. We've seen it all before.
If you don't like what Canelo Alvarez is doing, you're in the minority, my friend.
There aren't enough people like you that give a fuck about the fighters that you give a fuck about.
Nobody gives a fuck about those guys.
What you want is for more people and channels like this one to give a fuck about the fighters you cap for. Fighters that the majority of fight fans don't give a fuck about, even though video after video, time and time again, we characterize why it is that the paying public doesn't give a fuck about the fighters you like.
We tell you all the time, but you don't want to listen.
So don't listen. Ignore the facts and stats, the names and dates. Do whatever the fuck you want. The situation's not going to change. Nothing's going to make Jermall Charlo a standout fighter or David Benavidez. They had their chance.
You want guys like me to think that those fucking guys are special.
They're not fucking special. Every single one of them, every single one, is interchangeable with the other. Thus, I've no gripes who it is Canelo Alvarez picks.
He could fight Charlo, he could not fight Charlo.
He's nothing special.
He could fight Benavidez, he could not fight Benavidez.
He's nothing special. At this point, Canelo Alvarez can fight whoever he wants to fight because he's earned the right to choose, having put in the kind of legwork that these guys haven't put in. And you don't want to acknowledge that, you don't have to.
You don't give a shit anyway.